Hey everybody, Bradley here. I'd like to thank everybody for checking out the videos and all the feedback and comments and suggestions that they've been posting. I greatly appreciate that. Today what we're going to do is three of the most common things that I get asked when talking to people about airbrushing is A, what airbrush do you use? B is how much do you thin your paint? And then C is how much air do you use when you're painting? So hopefully I'll put this together pretty simple for you. I've already done the video on the types of airbrushes and the different types. I'll do another video right shortly after this one about the air pressures, which will help you out. But this one here, we'll talk about thinners, and we'll try to make it pretty quick and simple and easy for you. I think one of the biggest things with thinners and reducers is a lot of people are thinking of different times down the road where they've painted things, whether it be a helmet, a bike, a plastic model kit, or whatever. And the paints back then are totally different than what the paints are nowadays. Water-based airbrush paint that we have right now has really kind of spoiled us. I can remember back in the day with a Pactor paint, we had to mix the paint with thinner in order to get the paint to bite onto the bodies. Okay, that rule is kind of like debunked and kind of gone. Anytime you go out now and you buy water-based paints, and here's some that we use. I use an awful lot of the Proline paint, the Createx water-based paint, and then there's other paints also that I've done a video on that showed where they're a water-based paint, but they're not airbrush, which means they're quite a bit thicker, and you can still turn these into an airbrush paint. I've showed a video on how to do that, but let's take these out of the way for now. These are all the thicker ones, and we'll talk about the most common ones that we use. The thing is with all the paints, look for, they'll say that they're airbrush paints on it. And what that's telling you, it's automatically reduced down to where you can spray it through your gun. What a lot of people say, well, yeah, it's not really, it doesn't spray exactly how I want, and it says airbrush ready, but it's not. You still got to mess with it. There's a lot of different theories and a lot of different ways to get the paints to spray that you want. And people, then they ask me, they're kind of surprised of, how much reducer that I use on all the paints that I use, and the answer is very little and next to none. What I do is the reducer that I use is by Createx. It's the 4011. I buy an 8-ounce bottle at Hobby Lobby. This bottle is probably just under halfway. I probably had it 6 or 7 months. So I use very little thinner, and I'll show you when I do use it. I'm not going to say I totally don't use it, but I'll show you the application when I use it. Back to the paints. Every one of these paints, even if you get them, the different colors are going to have a different property to it and a different texture. So for example, your pearl paints that you're going to get by Createx or even Proline or some of the other brands that are out there, they are going to be a little bit thicker than your normal paints that you're going to use. So with the air pressure that you're using, you're going to need to reduce them down to get them to spray like the other paints. Your fluorescent colors, which is a little bit waterier, if you haven't used them yet, you'll soon find out. They're a little bit thinner and they spray a little bit easier for you. And then you can even go to the transparent paints, which is even thinner yet. They're more like a water. So there's really no need to reduce those paints when you're first starting out. With that being said, a lot of people, when they first start out painting, the first thing that they want to do is they're going to get a paint, pick whatever color you choose. They're going to put it in their gun and they're going to say, all right, well, how much reducer do I need to put into it without even trying it? Okay. 99% of the paints that I use that come from either Createx or Proline that are for airbrush, I shoot them right out of the bottle. There's no need to reduce them, no need to put thinner in them. They're going to spray right out of the bottle. Where people get in trouble is the air compressor that I use in the holding tank. The needle goes from 0 pounds of air pressure up to, I believe it's 100 or 120 pounds of air. So there's a wide range of air that I can shoot at, okay? Back when I first started airbrush painting, I used to use the aerosol can, which was a can of propellant. It had no dial on it, it had no needle, I had no idea how much air I was shooting through it, so you basically had to do it by feel. In other words, it kind of feels like when you're first starting out to drive and people tell you to go 35 miles on your car, you're driving with your head through the handlebars of the steering wheel to see what 35 miles an hour feels like, because you don't know yet. So that's kind of where you're at with them paint. As you learn to develop and drive, you kind of have an idea of what 35 feels like going down the road without having to look at that speedometer. So rule of thumb, and I always tell people is don't focus on the air pressure that you're shooting with right off the bat. You'll get that feel and that touch as you go. You want to basically learn to get a feel of when you have the airbrush, you put the paint into it, and you're going to want to hit that sweet spot of how that paint flows through that airbrush, okay? The way we do that is one of two ways. You can either put more air into the gun, or you can put reducer to it. Me personally, I'll do another video on the air pressures that I use, but Air pressures is a lot easier to adjust and dial just by turning a needle to put more air through the gun or less air through the gun. Me personally, I shoot with a lot of air, probably more air pressure than what a lot of people do, but I don't have to worry about reducing the paint. Like I mentioned, each one of these paint is going to have a different consistency. So for example, some people say, well, this blue here I use, 3 drops of the thinner to it. This one here I use 1, or was it 3 on this one or 2? It makes it more confusing. Okay, so a lot of times you can shoot these paints and you want to try to shoot them right out of the bottle without having to reduce them. Okay, when I do reduce the paint is when I get to the point to where the air pressure that I'm using will not push the paint through the gun. It's going to start to clog up on the tip. It's going to start to sputter. It's going to start to do things that I don't want it to do. But what I know and I do is I know how I want that feel to come out of that gun with a paint. So I have to, as I turn the air pressure down because of the area that I'm painting, I don't want to use as much air. So that's when I have to start introducing the reducers onto the paint. So I use them only basically when I'm doing light shading at low air pressure coming through the gun. Any other time, if I have a paint that I put in my airbrush and I want to shoot it and it's not flowing like I want, I introduce more air to the gun. I'll simply take the dial and turn it up. That way I know each time when I pull that bottle out, I don't have to worry about putting reducers to which bottle, to how many drops to get it to feel. You're going to start to feel that sweet spot. So people are most common and used to the old-fashioned ways that we have to put reducer in all these paints in order to get them to work and flow through the gun, when in all actuality you can do the same thing by basically just turning the air up. Now, if you have a smaller compact compressor or you have something where you're gaining air from, it only puts out the 25 to the 30 pounds of air pressure, you may be on the borderline of not being able to spray it exactly how you want it to feel out of the bottle. At that point, then you're kind of forced to have to go to a reducer. Okay. A question that I ask people too is why are you using reducer? What is your reasoning for using it? And people say, well, I use it to help the paint flow through the gun better. And that's the right answer. That's what you want to do. I also hear the people saying, well, I help the reducer because it helps the paint stick to the body. And then on top of it, there's all different types of additives that you can put in the paint. There's a 40-30, there's a 40-12. There's all different types of chemicals that you can put into the paint for different reasons. 40-30 is one that a lot of people say, I use that all the time, and I start mixing it with all this paint to get the paint to stick on the body. If you cannot get paint to stick to an RC car body by shooting it straight out of the bottle, you're doing something different wrong. You're not either prepping the body right, you're not spraying it right, you're not drying it right, you're not layering the paints correctly. When you people start putting the 40-30 in there because it's got a flex agent to it, and when you start introducing the reducer to it, you've got all this different mixture of chemicals going on, that's when people run into most of the trouble, because what happens is by thinning the paint down, it's going to look different as you apply it onto the body. So when it looks different, you're going to have to use a second coat or maybe even a third coat. So by doing that, you're having to use and waste more paint and more product when in all actuality, you can be able to shoot it right out of the bottle if you have enough air pressure to push it through your gun. The other thing also why I try to stay away from using the reducers and the 40-30 and a lot of the different product that you can mix into it, most of the designs and stuff that we do with RC car bodies is done with the liquid mask, okay? When you start putting more paint on there and it's reduced down, you're introducing a lot more of the reducer, the 40-30, the different product in there, and it's going to start to gum up your liquid mask. The stuff never dries really solid, but when you start doing that, you're putting more on that liquid mask than just paint, okay? That's where you're going to run into trouble also, because the liquid mask is not going to peel really nice. It's going to smear, it's going to tear. It may even pull other paint up with it because you've got different reducers over different types of paints that are trying to attach and to hold to each other. So by using it, a lot of times people have the right train of mind. I see where they're thinking with it, but you can also do it by using more air versus using more product. The stuff's not cheap. If you're using it and it's working well for you, by all means, don't change it. You've got something that's working for you. If you're new starting out, a lot of times it can get overwhelming when you hear people talking about, well, I use this reducer with this flex agent, with this different types of reducers and chemicals and stuff that you put in the paints. You don't have to do that. The paints are already made that way for you. They will stick. I've had bodies where I've hit and an impact and turned the bodies inside out. The paint will not come off, it will not flake off. A lot of times when people call me or they ask me questions about that, I'll start talking to them about how they're cleaning the body or how they're laying and how they're prepping it. And chances are they're probably doing something close but slightly different that may be causing the issue for that paint not to stick. So the paint will stick right straight out of the bottle for you. The times where I mentioned where I do use it is when I'm turning the air pressure way down low because I'm going to be doing something smaller, like the flames on this, or I'll be doing some shadows or on some tighter lines where I don't want that high air pressure that I normally use. I'll turn it down, but then I'll have to introduce the reducer to the paint to get it to flow through the gun. When I do it, I use an eyedropper and I put it in by the drops, the 6 or 8 drops. You mix it up in the gun with a toothpick and you stir it on up. Do not pre-mix the paint and store it in a bottle thinking you're all set for the next time. The paints like that don't work that way. Only mix up the amount that you're going to use for that time when you're shooting the body. The other thing too that I want to talk about is when you're cleaning out your gun. You have to start with a clean gun. If you don't have a clean gun, it doesn't matter how you reduce the paint. You're going to reduce this down to where it's water to get it to push the paint to go through the gun, okay? So you have to keep the gun clean. When you're changing colors, when you're spraying out, all you need to use is water. We're using water-based paints, okay? If you're not rinsing it out correctly and you go to shoot your next color and you see, if you're shooting red into a pink and all of a sudden in a white, and now you're spraying, you're getting pink, you're just simply not rinsing your gun out good enough and you're not cleaning it out. When you clean it out thoroughly each time between colors, that's all you're going to need to use. A lot of times people will use this airbrush cleaner. Not necessary, because it's simply water-based paint that we're using, and you're not cleaning out good enough if you have to use an additional item like this to clean it all out. This is a bottle that I got with, I think, one of the first original airbrushes that I got that I never used. If you're painting and you notice that you do get some paint that's wanting to dry along the tip of it, just simply use iso alcohol. It's going to evaporate before you even put your next color in there, and it's going to take that water-based paint off there in no time. But the biggest rule of thumb is keep your gun clean as you're painting it. You don't need to use a secondary method, a secondary airbrush cleaner to clean it out between coats. The thing that's funny is, if you read these, it doesn't even really say what paints you use this for. So if you're going from an acrylic to an enamel to a lacquer to a water base, it just says it's a cleaner to rinse it out between. So it basically, I don't want to say it's useless. I've never had the need for it though. Use the iso alcohol. This is the only reducer that I use. I don't use any of the flex agents. I don't use any other additives besides that for the painting on the bodies, except for when I'm shadowing. So hopefully this will help you out. There's a lot of different paints. If you're first starting out trying it, pick up a bottle of the 4011 reducer. You're going to eventually need it somewhere down the road. It doesn't go bad. It lasts me about a year. So you're going to want to have some. Use it to experiment around with. What I always encourage people of too is when they're first starting out, get a couple different types of paint and learn how to get that feeling. Don't focus so much on the air pressure or, someone said, I seen a video, I got to use 30 pounds or 32 pounds or 35 pounds or whatever it may be. Learn to adjust and get the flow of that paint how you want it to feel coming out of the gun. Some people like having less air, some people like having more air. You're going to feel when it's the sweet spot for you. So hopefully that will help you out. If you have any other questions on the reducers or anything that I use or methods or how I do it, please don't hesitate to send me a message. I'll get back to you and reply back to you on it. So once again, thanks for watching the videos. Remember to like and subscribe, and I appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next one.